So Danny Phantom's video game library didn't just stop with the release of the Ultimate Enemy for the Game Boy Advance, which I had covered in my last video. No, in fact, Danny Phantom actually got a sequel title in the form of Danny Phantom Urban Jungle, released for the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS in 2006, just 3 weeks before the actual episode it's based upon premiered on television. Now, in the case of Ultimate Enemy, designing a game around that story actually made a decent bit of sense, given that it was a 44-minute TV special with higher stakes and an interesting twist of seeing an evil Danny 10 years in the future. It was actually a pretty substantial moment within the canon of the TV series. I mean, meeting Danny's older self, seeing what he'd look like if he was evil, establishing that Jazz is now in on his secret. Yeah, this was a pivotal moment for the show. Urban Jungle, on the other hand, is just a regular old Danny Phantom episode featuring Mark Hamill as the main villain, and Danny gets ice powers, which is cool, but it doesn't carry that same level of impact. Interestingly enough though, Urban Jungle actually has a peculiar backstory behind its inception and original premiere on Nickelodeon back in 2006. See, for one reason or another, Nick actually decided to push this episode as the Season 3 premiere of the series, rather than the actual intended episode, Eye for an Eye. And in accordance with this decision, the channel also decided to market the episode as a special named Phantom Freeze rather than Urban Jungle, which indicates to me why this was probably the case. What doesn't make sense to me is why they'd market the special under a different name when there was a video game tie-in to sell along with it, but hey, what do I know? I tried digging into this a bit by doing some research on the subject and wasn't able to come up with a definitive answer, but I am inclined to hypothesize that the reason why this episode was picked and marketed so heavily was because in this episode, Danny got new ice powers. I mean, think about it. New ghost powers, the potential to sell new toys, the video game tie-in. Seems like an easily marketable event that'll get kids to tune in. Yep. Pretty sure that was the reason. Again, this is my own conjecture here, but from a marketing standpoint, it makes sense. The network pushed this as a special, saying, "Oh man, Danny's got some new ice powers. Better tune into the episode to see what they're like," and things like that. The best part, though, is that by airing this episode out of order, Nickelodeon ended up creating some ripples in continuity because events like Vlad becoming mayor and Danny meeting Frostbite hadn't happened yet. Canonically, they occurred during the events of the episodes before this one, so way to go there, Nick. I can imagine many Danny Phantom fans found themselves confused when they witnessed these things for the first time. Making this video has gotten me really curious about how the video game came about, however. Was this meant to help push the Season 3 premiere, or was it just a side effect of, we need a new Danny Phantom game, base it off this episode? I'm not sure, but regardless, this is what we ended up with, and according to various sources, there was originally supposed to be a console version released for this game too, but just like Ultimate Enemy, that was unfortunately scrapped, so it never came to fruition. It's a shame, really. I think a 3D Danny Phantom console game could have worked really well if it were done correctly, but alas, Nick Games went 2 for 2 in failing to create one. The actual episode of Urban Jungle from the Danny Phantom cartoon follows a basic premise of a supernatural plant being known as the Undergrowth coming to Amity Park and infesting the city with his plant children so that he may eventually overgrow and take over the world. He proves to be a formidable opponent for Danny, going so far as to possess everybody else in town, including Sam, whom he makes his primary follower via mind control. Given that she has such an affection for plant life as established earlier on in the episode, it makes sense that she's the best available vessel for him. Throughout the episode, Danny is also dealing with ghost puberty because he keeps getting these unnatural chills that causes his internal body temperature to freeze, but as he comes to find out after meeting with Frostbite, it's actually just his new ice powers developing. Personally, I think the concept of Danny having ice powers is a nifty idea, given that ghosts are typically associated with colder temperatures, and it's justified with the acknowledgement that his ghost detection ability was a smaller attribute of his full icy capabilities. That's why he would always get a chill when his sense went off, so to speak. Anyways, he trains for a bit and then returns to defeat the Undergrowth because ice is super effective on grass types, rescues Sam and the rest of Amity Park, and then Tucker murders the ghost with a lawnmower.
I am regenerating! I will take over!
Ah yes, nothing like ruthless slaughter to end off a cartoon episode. The video game follows this plotline to a T for the first 3 levels. Then, because there wasn't enough content in the episode to flesh out a whole video game, the back half features Danny and crew going to Walker's prison, Danny getting trapped inside the internet by Technus, and then fighting a possessed Tucker as the meat monster, followed by the Undergrowth and Lunch Lady's hybrid final boss, Meat and Potatoes. Personally, I'll still take that over box lunch, but hey. Yeah, to say that the game kinda goes off the rails after the halfway point would be an understatement because most of it has nothing to do with anything that happened in the first 3 stages. Maybe if the episode were a 2-parter or something, it would have worked better in the way that the Ultimate Enemy did, but sadly, this is what we got. Also, I suppose I should acknowledge that for the majority of this video, I will primarily be focusing on the DS version of the game for no other reason than it having the better graphics of the 2 versions, given its higher resolution screen and superior hardware compared to the Game Boy Advance. I'll be highlighting the differences between the versions after I've established the core mechanics of the game, which, speaking of, is a drastic change from the 2D side-scroller beat-em-up that was the Ultimate Enemy. But hey, remember those 2 brief on-rail shooter stages that I quickly touched upon in that review? Well, this time THQ and Nick Games decided to create an entire game out of that, leaning more into the bullet hell side of things without ever getting to that level of difficulty that most bullet hells tend to. Danny's still got a health bar and some pretty strong defenses, and with the abundance of health power-ups, I never found myself struggling too much until the end, where the challenge did amp up a bit, but not to an unreasonable degree. There are also lives introduced in this game, unlike the previous title, but I never died once, so I didn't get to experience what a game over would lead to. The core of the game functions like this. The stage scrolls from left to right while you fly along the different environments, shooting down enemies that come across your path. Think games like Gradius, Thunder Force, the shooter sections in most Kirby games, etc. All you have to do is fly around avoiding projectiles and enemies while blasting your way through them in any way you can. Luckily, Danny here has quite a versatile artillery when it comes to blasting down these ghosts. His basic attack comes in the form of a projectile shot simply labeled as normal, but upon grabbing these specially marked power-ups, Danny can unlock other types of shots, those being piercing, homing, and laser. The piercing shot goes through multiple targets, hitting upon the first contact like the normal shot. The homing shot obviously homes in on enemies, and the laser consists of a beam attack that stretches across the entire screen, dealing multiple hits for the duration that it's out. But it comes at the cost of having the slowest rate of fire compared to all other attacks. Personally, I found myself using the homing shot the most just because the convenience of it targeting multiple enemies around the screen away from where you might possibly be aiming is super convenient. Although I'd go to the piercing shot every now and then when I really wanted to deal some damage. The laser power-up, on the other hand, is actually mostly useful in boss fights. The other benefit of these different shot types is that by picking up these green vial power-ups, you can level up the beam attacks to levels 2, 3, and 4, which not only increase their damage output, but also their range and projectile size. The normal shot in particular becomes a rather useful spread shot that envelops most of the screen, which certainly has its uses. There are also health and ectoplasm power-ups that enemies sometimes drop, which Danny stores on the bottom screen. You can use these abilities at any time, akin to the Scam of the Century, by simply tapping them during gameplay to heal yourself or earn back a bit of your special meter. That's right, just like Ultimate Enemy, Danny has a special meter that dictates how many of his special moves he can use, but rather than transforming back to his normal form, Danny remains as a ghost for the entire game, so now he uses a different method to recharge his ghost meter, with the introduction of the polarity mechanic. By tapping the R button, Danny is able to swap his polarity between red and blue. Seeing as most enemy projectile attacks come out in the form of red or blue projectiles, you as the player need to make sure Danny's polarity color matches the color of the projectile that hits him. If so, you gain some special meter back, if not, you take some damage. This is essentially the defensive aspect of Danny's artillery, adding an extra element to the gameplay which I think enhances the experience overall. It's a nifty on-the-fly mechanic that gives you some defensive capabilities if you have a good reaction time to quickly swap back and forth, identical to the same mechanics seen in the game Ikaruga. Don't go into this expecting a massively difficult time though. Gotta bear in mind that this game was designed for children as the target demographic, so this game doesn't ever go too far into the bullet hell territory. Hard mode is a decent time all things considered, but still pales in comparison to some of the more extreme shooter games out there. But what good is a special meter without special moves? And that's where Danny's 3 item abilities come in the form of ghost powers, equipment, and capture tools. As you progress throughout the game, Danny collects additional ghost powers, but the first starting ability is the invisibility power, which of course turns you invisible and makes you immune from attack for a few seconds. Then of course, Danny also gets the expected ice power as he does in the actual show, which is a strong attack similar to the piercing shot, and a fire power similar to the homing shot, both of which are pretty strong when using a full special meter to deplete them. And of course, last but not least is the famous ghostly whale attack, which acts as a powerful screen nuke just as it did in the previous title. As for the capture tools though, they all function the same way with a different means of use. The Fenton Thermos simply captures ghosts from a short range, the vacuum does the same thing from a medium range, the fishing pole has a far reach but can only grasp enemies in a straight line, and the Fenton Ghost Gauntlets are an up close but powerful clap attack that can capture anything within its short radius. All of these are items depicted in the actual show, by the way. This feature is primarily useful for filling out your ghost compendium, and as you can clearly see, I did not go for completing this because I didn't find these items all that useful. Unfortunately, in order for you to progress through the boss rush mode that you unlock after beating the game, you do have to collect these ghosts for that, so that was a little annoying, but hey, I suppose it just provides a replayability factor, which isn't inherently a bad thing. As for the middle row of equipment, well, the only power-up you actually get is the Boomerang, which levels up alongside your other shot types. The other 3 slots belong to the random as hell ship flying stage ripped right out of Star Fox during World 4. No other world in the game has this level type, and it has no influence on the plot whatsoever, but yeah, after Danny defeats the Undergrowth and rescues Sam, he takes her and Tucker to Walker's prison in the Ghost Zone, where they end up fighting Youngblood's pirate ship in a very Star Fox-esque boss fight that I actually found to be very enjoyable, in the DS version specifically. It's weird and somewhat out of place compared to the rest of the game, but at the very least it does prevent the side-scrolling shooter gameplay from feeling stale by putting everything in a 3D shooter sequence to mix things up. This ship is what hosts the other 3 equipment types in Danny's power-up slots, with them being a shield, additional missile damage, and a screen nuke that does exactly what you'd expect. As with the previous entry, the boss fights are easily the most enjoyable sequences of the entire game, whether it be fighting Plant Queen Sam or Technus in his giant ghost mech suit. They all provide a fun challenge, and I only wish there were more bosses to fight during the main campaign because you can only shoot through the same hordes of enemies so many times before you start to get bored of it. Thankfully, that boss rush mode exists, as I mentioned earlier, so it's not a complete loss, and you even get to fight other villains like Ember or Vlad who don't appear in the main game otherwise. Other than that though, that's pretty much all there is to Danny Phantom Urban Jungle. You can only say so much about an on-rails shooter game given the fact that the core of the gameplay ultimately comes down to how does this side-scrolling shooter differ from other side-scrolling shooters. I didn't encounter any glitches, there weren't any frustratingly broken sequences, it was all in all just a fun Danny Phantom themed arcade game. I wish the game was a bit longer, seeing as, once again, I was able to complete the entire thing in under 90 minutes, but it's a fun time while it lasts, and I definitely wouldn't mind coming back to this one again if I were ever in the mood for it. The sprite work of the DS version looks particularly stunning, although I'm a little torn on the 3D environments because on one hand they do a very good job at capturing the show's art style, but on the other hand they look very basic and plain due to the distinct lack of texturing. I mean, when you're flying through the internet and these giant blocks are just obscuring a huge portion of the screen, it's kinda hard not to notice how bare they look. And I tell you what, it's a damn shame this wasn't a 3DS title, because if a layer of depth could have been added, it really would have enhanced the overall experience of the game. The only differences between the DS version and the Game Boy Advance version that's worth noting, other than the graphics of course, is just that you're stuck using one screen so you can't easily refer to the bottom to cycle through your items or shot types. When you pick up a shot type, that's the only one you can use until you get a different one, so you better hope that once you get the shot type you like, you don't accidentally lose it. The other significant difference difference is that because the GBA couldn't handle 3D graphics on the same level as the Nintendo DS, Chapter 4 was changed to a point-and-shoot style challenge you'd see in classic arcades like the Tomb Raider game, for example, rather than the Star Fox style of the DS level. Otherwise though, yeah, they're essentially the same game. The DS version also supported a multiplayer mode where you could link up with other people to play against each other, but unfortunately, due to me not having the resources available to show that off, I unfortunately can't speak on that mode's behalf. And that's okay. I'd personally recommend the DS version over the GBA version anyways because it's the clearly superior version, but it's not like the GBA game is an absolute train wreck due to the weaker hardware. Au contraire, I think that both are serviceable entries that can be said for the entirety of Danny Phantom's game library. Yep, all 2 of them, but 2 good video games are better than none, and Danny Phantom fans out there are sure gonna get a kick out of these. They both do a good job of capitalizing on what a Danny Phantom video game could be like, on a handheld system of course. Still wish we could have gotten console releases of these games, but whether they were cancelled due to development troubles, budget difficulties, time constraints, or some other fourth thing, I suppose that's entirely up to speculation. Guess the Nicktoons Unite games will have to do, but I won't be getting to that series anytime soon. It'll probably be a long time again before I end up talking about Danny Phantom, so hopefully these videos will do for the time being. That's just about going to do it for Danny Phantom Urban Jungle, so with that said, what direction am I going to be heading in next? Well, I figure it's probably time to return to a cartoon franchise that I've already covered 1 game from on the channel earlier on. That's right. Next, I'm heading back to Dexter's Lab, starting with the remaining 2 handheld games released for the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance respectively, Robot Rampage and Chess Challenge. Oh, and a brief segment on Science Ain't Fair as well. Hope you guys are looking forward to it. Until next time, Shadowstreak, signing off.